search for autonomy. And they prefer the term autonomy for freedom. Freedom is now a term for neoliberalism, as if everybody is free there. But we know from the sciences it's empirically not true. Genetically, from brain research, from historical knowledge, we know to which extent we are through and through determined by various ways. We are not as free as we think. There are alienations, there are causes for a lot of things. But you can't absolutize that position, because then you run into self-contradictions. There are something with human acts, something with human thinking, in which we can fully talk about freedom, but that is a task. That's a question related to improvement of the human being, in being better in autonomy. Autonomy is not an absolute thing. It's a goal. It's a constitutive, regulative idea for those who want to have it philosophically. It's something we have to strive for. It's a task for each individual and also for society to give schools and space for developing this aspect. Now, and then if you have a democracy, there is no democracy running only with a legal system. You have to have people who know what they are voting about, who are free and educated. No democracy functions without obligatory schools. So, if you bring these three aspects together, the search for truth in modern societies, the need for improving our autonomy, and the democracy demanding also freedom of speech in order to get better solutions, then I think we have some justification for why freedom of speech is important. And now, where are the limits? There is something to the first point mentioned by Ali Fayed, and that is the offense of human beings. I would say there are two major reasons for restricting freedom of expression. And I'll come back to this first one, but the second, I'll just mention it so it's clear, and I guess here in Lebanon, it's bloodily clear. There are some acts, also verbal acts, that might lead to catastrophes, chaos, and war. So in order to have security from a state for a society, there are some expressions you should limit. That's the first thing, the basic political thing, to avoid chaos, if you like. But then, coming back to the first point, that is a tricky point. Why is it tricky? Well, it's tricky because what is an insult for one person isn't insult for another, and who is then deciding what is insult? And you could get the very special situation where people are very clever in feeling insulted all the time, and maybe more so than most people would find reasonable. So it's a question, what is it to be reasonably insulted, and what is it to be unreasonable and reasonably insulted? That is a tricky question. And to some extent, I'll come back to it. Let me say like this. If we justify freedom of expression in these three ways, search of truth, bettering our autonomy, helping democracy functioning, then we can also see that there are three levels on which the freedom of speech will be challenged. The first one is on the political level, that there are censorship, people aren't allowed to say what they want, and very often, especially in Anglo-Saxon rhetorics, that's the main focus, how to avoid that the state should pose upon you what you are allowed to say. And that's true enough. I mean, those who have seen from the inside the Soviet Union or the Nazi regime would see the need of that. I do not need to say more about it, that's for sure. But there are two other levels, because modern societies are differentiated as to the institutions. Not only the political institution, which again certainly is differentiated in various ways in modern societies, but also the market. The market, by advertising, lifestyle advertising, that's a way of, what is it? To make you do things you hadn't thought you should do. It's to intervene in well, should we say the freedom? It's a freedom of those having the capital to inform you, but it's a way of indoctrinating you into some behavior that you didn't want, maybe. So that shows how complicated it is, because it's not only on the political level, it's also in economy. It's still something valuable about what Karl Marx said in his youth writings about alienation and the power of the economic of propaganda, but also of advertisement in various kinds, being now done scientifically with psychology on a high level. And then there is the kind of indoctrination which you have on the cultural level. In churches, in mosques, in synagogues, and all over the place. And that's also a part of it. Where is you talked about the freedom, yes, good. But we know from the history that it hasn't always been the freedom of thought. There has been indoctrination all along, and we should be very careful. But that, again, is a difficult question, because we aren't born full-fledged. I mean, we aren't born with our language. We learn the language. We get a social identity by interaction. So kids have to be formed. But how do we get from forming them and indoctrinating them? That's a tricky question. We should take that. But we should also see that there is always a danger of overdoing it paternalistically, also, should we say, in the third major institution in modern society, talking politics, economy, and now about culture. We should be careful. So that's what I would say to start with. I would recall that the question about the freedom of expression in general is a question related to the system of law. It's a question, what should be by law forbidden? By law forbidden. And you see, in my conception now, it is an open question, not only why dictatorship should be forbidden. If you could use law against dictatorship, you couldn't, but at least some political authoritarian tendencies. But I think also that, for instance, political propaganda or advertisements in the television, that's a tricky question. You buy voters. And what is that? Is that to intervene with the autonomy of people? I think there you have, those are tricky questions, being much discussed. And here there is a difference between, how you do say, the neoliberalist and the more, should I say, social philosophical perspective of mind. That we could discuss, but that's an important issue. But it's a question of law, how to sanction against some verbal utterances, not actions. Well, there is a tricky question, what is an action and what is verbal utterance, certainly, but let's leave that for the time being. It's that which is the issue in the main discussion about freedom of expression. But then, certainly, in a civilized society, there are various sanctions. One thing is to forbid something legally. Another thing is to say something is very bad morally. There are many bad acts morally that we didn't want to forbid legally. There should maybe be even a margin there. That has to be discussed. So I would say there is a responsibility when you utter something. There is a human moral responsibility, even a political responsibility, that you should be nice with people, polite with people, and so on and so forth. But that's one normative level. There is another and a stricter level where you forbid and could put people in jail and whatever if they do not behave. So you have to have these two. So one has to decide where should it be. Let me add something about Holocaust. I think people should be allowed to deny Holocaust, but I do not think they should get exams if they wrote it in a thesis, because it isn't true what they're saying. So there are various ways of sanctioning, and not all sanctions should go by the legal system, nor should all go by the moral system. Some are just wrong statements, and they should get a failure. They should get F. So there are various ways in modern societies of intervening and giving sanctions. And I would be very reluctant if the students of mine who are stupid, whether I should put them in jail because they say stupid things. I do not think that's the right thing to do. Now, I will move over to religion. First of all, we talk about religion. But what today is religion? Indian religion? Believing in one God, many gods, a good God, a bad God. A God that is good and God, a good that is God is close or far away, or no God, or in witches, or Satanism. Is that a religion? In short, who has now the power or the right, the normative right to tell you what is a religion? And before that issue is settled, it's very hard to say what should be the freedom of religion. Should Satanism be respected and in the social democracy economically supported, like the three monotheistic religions, or should it not? So the question about religion is, first of all, what do we mean by religion? So we should be careful. But if we stay with the three monotheistic religions, and I agree totally, they are structurally the same. There are many things also in these religions that have nothing to do, immediately at least, with rationality and what have you. But there are some aspects, not in all religions, not in religiosity in general, but in these three religions there are. It's one God. It's a monotheism. It's a claim. And this God is good, gives the laws, and judges. Okay. Then you have the problem of evil, from the book on Job to Auschwitz. Where was God, Yahweh, in Auschwitz? That's a problem of evil. Tsunami. The earthquake in Lisbon in 1755 couldn't be punishment for sins. People died, burned up. How could the good God do all that? No. If you aren't careful in the three monotheistic religions, you might end up presenting a notion of God which is very hard to separate from a notion of a Satan. And in monosatanism, that must be, I take it, blasphemy. So there is a tendency among pious people who think they are very pious, but to make God a really terrible God, in a way very punishing, sending people for hell for eternity, for no proportions, I would say, between the sin and the sanction, to my mind and to most people's mind. So, that is unavoidable.